A distinctly American phenomenon, lynchings increased in the years after Reconstruction, peaking in the early 1890s and remaining a source of terror deep into the 20th century. The victims were overwhelmingly black. But while white supremacists could terrorize black lives, they couldn't silence those fearless enough to expose their crimes to the world.
There were a lot of newspapers in the 19th century published by both blacks and whites. White newspapers would have like an occasional sort of page dedicated to Negro news, or if blacks were covered at all, it was in a very negative fashion.
If we looked at the dominant publications, we only had a kind of exculpatory story of white actions toward black people in American history. But when we want the first draft of black history, it required that we have actual black publications and black journalists who were crafting narratives of what they saw, what they experienced, and what they heard.
A young journalist fought back by crafting positive narratives about African Americans. Her name was Ida B. Wells. Starting with her battle with the railroad in 1883, Wells began chronicling her fight against Jim Crow. Though she lost her case, she didn't lose momentum as a writer, abandoning her career as a teacher and becoming a journalist full-time.
She writes about women, politics. She sort of writes about whatever is on her mind.
In 1889, she becomes one-third owner of the Free Speech, which is a very militant newspaper in Memphis, Tennessee, at a time when racial tensions are really rising.
One incident in particular brought racial violence painfully close to home for Ida B. Wells.
One day, two boys were playing marbles. The black boy beat the white boy. The fathers got involved. Eventually, the whole conflict moved over to the People's Grocery Store, a local black-owned grocery store that was competing with another white-owned grocery store.
A number of black men were arrested, including the three owners of the People's Grocery, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart. In the middle of the night, 75 masked men grabbed the three men from jail and take them to an abandoned railway yard and lynch them. Ida Wells is out of town selling subscriptions. She comes back to a community that is shocked.
Thomas Moss was a friend of Ida B. Wells, along with his wife.
In fact, Ida is the godmother of his child.
The white press portrayed all three men quite disrespectfully. They put up these sketch drawings of them dead with bullet wounds in their heads. It was all very grisly.
Ida decides that she's going to actually investigate these lynchings. This is a woman, and she's only about 5 feet tall. And she has decided that she is going to go to the scenes of lynchings. She's going to interview those who are witnesses. She's going to collect the newspaper articles about lynchings all over the country.
Often the allegation associated with lynching was that there had been a rape. Ida B. Wells would find out that a lot of these allegations had absolutely no truth to them. They masked consensual relationships between white women and black men.
8 Negroes lynched since last issue of the Free Speech. If Southern white men are not careful, they will overreach themselves and public sentiment will have a reaction. A conclusion will then be reached, which will be very damaging to the moral reputation of their women.
Ida B. Wells says if you actually look at what's going on with these lynchings, they say that it's about sexual violence, that they're protecting white Southern womanhood. But many of these victims are actually African Americans who are doing quite well. And the sole reason they have been targeted is to take away what they have accomplished.
Ida was out of town when this article comes out, and no sooner than it hits the newsstands, the white mob gathers and goes to the free speech and destroyed it. She went out and got a pistol and put it in her purse. She didn't think that she would actually be able to hold off the lynchers, but she wanted some of them to die while they were killing her.
Ida B. Wells' investigative journalism came at a price. Her newspaper attacked, her life threatened. Wells was driven out of Memphis. But this only spurred her to write more. As she noted in 1892, "It's with no pleasure I have dipped my hands in the corruption here exposed. Somebody must show that the Afro-American race is more sinned against than sinning, and it seems to have fallen upon me to do so."
She's supported by Black women who help her put together the funds to publish her pamphlet. She promotes it when she goes on these speaking tours and gives lectures.
Ida B. Wells actually sets the record straight. Her journalism and the Black press are constantly keeping that dissenting voice in American society.
How would you describe Ida B. Wells to someone who didn't know anything about her?
She was just absolutely fearless. She wrote about probably the most untouchable subject at that time, which was the extrajudicial killing of Black men and women by mob.
Will we always need an Ida in the world of journalism?
Absolutely. Having that voice of not just reporting the facts, but of morality, of saying that this is an injustice that needs to be righted, will always be necessary. Not just in the United States, but I think in any place where peoples are oppressed. The press is the one who has influence on policies and politics. Failing to tell our own stories was giving up our agency. We were never going to have a true and accurate depiction of what our lives were like, what our America was like, as long as other people were writing those stories. And Ida B. Wells understood that in a very visceral way. For myself, that's why I became a journalist. Her courage has always been an inspiration to me.